Welcome to the District Download Podcast. I'm Kyle Etheridge, and today's episode will take a closer look into the mayor's proposed budget and how you can get involved. At this time, I'll turn it over to our guest moderator, Rachel Platt, to introduce our guests.
And hello to our special guests. We have Budget Chair Councilman Rick Blackwell from District 12. Welcome. Budget Vice Chair Councilman Kevin Kramer from District 11. And special guest Metro Government's Chief Financial Officer Angie Dunn. Thank you all so much for joining us. We want to welcome everybody who's listening. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the mayor's proposed budget. Hearings are now underway for the public to weigh in. We're going to get to that in just a bit. But a brief overview, $1.1 billion budget, 3.5% increase over last year's, focusing a whole lot on public safety and housing. Before we start peeling back the layers, what kind of response, I guess, first of all, have you been getting to the budget? And we'll start with the budget chair on that, Councilman Blackwell.
Yeah, I think overall, I think people are excited about the priorities of the budget, excited about where we are as a city in terms of our financial outlook, listening to folks as we go through each particular department and getting a better idea of if those departments are meeting the needs that we hear from our constituents, is a task. But I think, overall it's been very positive, and I would say it's been a really positive experience working with the new administration. It's difficult to come in, I'm sure. Never been in a situation, but I'm sure it's very difficult to come in and almost immediately jump into pulling together the numbers for a budget. And I think that they did a really good job with that, and been very cooperative, trying to, where there are places that we don't understand or places where it doesn't seem to make sense, some issues maybe of trying to figure out how this relates to last year's budget, which wasn't this administration's budget, have been very helpful in trying to help us to be able to understand that. It's been a very collaborative process.
That's good to hear with the new administration, because that was hit the ground running very quickly.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Councilman Kramer. Oftentimes we think budgets are lean and mean and things are getting cut, but this was actually an increase. I mean, were you optimistic about that going into it?
It is a slight increase. I think, again, to Councilman Blackwell's point, I think the real optimism comes in a reflection of the priorities that the current mayor's laid out. His priorities are a lot closer, I think, to what many of us on the council have been asking for the past several years now. In a meeting I was able to have with the mayor, some folks, he mentioned some deferred maintenance issues that he realizes that we have to deal with. He talked about public safety, which, of course, all of us realize is important. He talked about taking care of the things that government just should take care of naturally, cutting the grass, for crying out loud, paving streets. And so at one point, my body language was perhaps a little bit more than I anticipated it would be. And some of the folks in the room had to reassure the mayor that I was not laughing at him, but that I was actually very, very grateful. Yes, very grateful for the tack that he's taking. So I think that's where we start. Is I think the priorities that he's laid out are, and again, we'll get into the numbers. We're getting into numbers, and we'll get deeper and deeper. But just the tone of it feels a lot better. And then again, to Councilman Blackwell's point, the new folks in the administration have done a great job working across the street with us. Not only are they new to this whole Metro Council or Metro government type of budgeting, but the previous administration had decided to switch accounting systems. So they walked into not only, and of course to them it's the system that's there because it's a new system. The problem they're running into, and I'll let Angela speak to it more completely than I can, but the problem they're running into is when it comes time to compare it to last year's budgeting, the new system does not make that easy.
So you can't really tell how it compares. So let's bring you in, Angie. Is that one of the challenges for this?
Yes, it is. It's a challenge. The new system, it organizes information a little bit differently, or it organizes data differently than the old system did. And so when you're so the reporting presentation looks different. Some spending categories may have been combined, others were pulled apart when we were building the new system. So when you're trying to look line item by line item or category by category, you might see some differences from last year's budget compared to this year's budget. So it's a little bit of an apples to compares. I won't say apples to oranges, but it's similar but not similar in some cases. So it makes it a little difficult.
I'm assuming that will only get easier with time when you have something to
Absolutely.
compare it to. Get back to
Absolutely.
your apples and oranges on that one, I guess. Let's talk about the fact, if you can give us a bit of a brief overview of the budget and your thoughts on it with some of the highlights, and then we'll get deeper into some of the public safety and housing. How would you like a highlight, quick overview?
Well, I think, the mayor really highlighted in his speech, some of those areas, obviously public safety. He had some very calculated investments with affordable housing and some of the different big projects like community care campus and things of that nature. In a lot of ways, this budget was a bit of a continuation budget just because of the time constraints, but he definitely had some very strategic areas that he wanted to focus on as we were building this budget. And so I think, with the $1 billion or so, revenues that we're dealing with this year, he was very strategic in where he wanted to put that. So public safety obviously is definitely
Is that the bulk of it?
It is our public safety, and that's not just LMPD. That's all of your traditional public safety agencies. It comes in around 48% of the budget goes to those sorts of activities, the public safety activities.
And we'll get into housing and the different things on that. Are there any things that you feel would be the signature of the mayor that I know that was so important to him and he wanted that in, and that's a signature item?
Well, I think he has on many occasions used the term, a safer, stronger, and healthier community, and I really feel like that's become sort of his signature. So it's maybe a couple of different items, maybe not one single thing that stands out, but when you talk about public safety, his view is that it's not just policing, it's not just your public safety. It's the things that it's community centers staying open later. It's better lighting in our parks. It's a lot of different things like that that kind of add to this idea of a safer community, a stronger community, and a healthier community.
Well, we'll get to those points because obviously this budget comes at a time when violence in our city has rattled everyone. I'm sure you heard a lot of public input about that. We'll start with LMPD because they're getting an additional $6.8 million going in. And a lot of that, I think it's a $220 million budget for LMPD. A lot of that is just to hire new officers, right? To strengthen what we don't have, which is we're 300 short. Is that still correct? I don't know the number that we're short, but you all see that as a good priority, just getting us back up to where we need to be with police force?
Absolutely. And I also like the strategy for doing that, which costs money. So if you continue to try to hire the police officers that we have not been able to hire for the last 10 years or whatever, where we've been short. So if we continue the exact same strategies that we have right now, there's a pretty good chance we're not going to hire the people again this year. So I love the fact that he came in with fresh eyes and said, you know what, we've got to do some things. Hiring is difficult throughout the whole community. And so if you hire the way that you did in 85, you're going to you're not going to get the results you did in 85. So some of the strategies for having people be able to look at different ways to get the message out to folks, different ways to recruit folks, different ways to actually even describe what the jobs are. And I know the private sector's done a lot of that as well. The old job descriptions that people are looking back and saying, this is no wonder we're not getting one. Have you read that? Have you read that?
Well, the job description of a police officer back then to now is,
vastly.
Yeah, completely different.
Vastly different. Yeah. So it's so I applaud that too. So because that is looking at an issue and saying, while you would want to put all the money just into, you think, well, maybe just pay or whatever. But if people don't understand, if somebody out there doesn't understand that we have put money into pay and that the pay is very different from what it was when they had looked at it 8 years ago, then that really isn't an incentive. So I'm really I like the strategy.
Couple of other things I saw: replacing ballistic gear, so gear bringing people up to date. The license plate readers also in high crime areas. That's something obviously everybody supported here.
Yes.
And then
Absolutely.
$2.1 million for 30 positions after the DOJ report to implement reforms. Let's talk about that just for a second. I don't know who wants to jump in. Obviously, this comes on the heels of a scathing DOJ report. Looks like there's a good chunk of money to address that. There was public outcry, obviously, before and after this report. Do you think that will satisfy? I don't know who wants to jump in on that one.
I would start with, interestingly enough, some of those positions that you're talking about were positions that the council had been talking about for a couple years before the DOJ report came out. It's not a new idea in Louisville by any stretch of the imagination to add social workers to the police department and to in some cases have police officers, have social workers respond to calls along with police officers where that's necessary. And in other instances, if it's something a social worker could handle without necessarily dispatching the police. Again, that's a conversation that had been going on for a while here in Louisville because we saw it working in other communities. So to Councilwoman Blackwell's point, we're grateful that the mayor embraced that, and that's some of what you're seeing in that budget.
Yeah,
I'll jump in there.
So my initial conversations with the folks with the DOJ, I think a lot of that will be being able to monitor progress as you go. So you have to not only do you work toward a consent decree with the Department of Justice, but then once you have that in place, you got to show that you're actually doing those things that you said that you were going to do. So I think a lot of it is that kind of position where you're going to monitor, which won't, in most cases, take a police officer off the street to be able to do that. You can do that with somebody who's a civilian who's actually trained in the area and is a professional in the area. So, yeah, absolutely necessary. I don't know that we know if the number is exactly accurate for what we're going to do, but because we haven't hired those folks before, and and some of those areas are high demand areas in the community too. So, but I'm sure you thought of all that as you were putting it together.
Well, you have to start somewhere. So sometimes it's like, well, we're going to start with a number and get it started, and then obviously you adjust for that as you go on and as you build these programs.
Yeah. One thing that you did mention was the lighting in parks, something that, helps the residents, hopefully helps prevent crime, all of the above. And for places like Chickasaw Park, a lot of them in the parks, and of course after the shooting there, it was very quickly that the mayor jumped in and said, we're going to upgrade lighting.
Right, absolutely. And there is money in the budget to accommodate for that. I don't know that I can quote it right off the top of my head how much, but there was a significant amount of funding that was added. It was an added item into the budget to make sure we get some lighting out there in some of these areas.
Outsider just looking in, it seemed like there was an outcry, and there was a pretty quick response to that with people saying, I want to feel safe in the park. I mean, it's for us. It's for residents. If I don't feel safe in the park, what's the point? I mean, it seemed like there was a pretty immediate response. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. Very, very quick response, I believe.
All right. Let's go on to the next thing, because when you all talked about that 911 with social services and mental health workers being on a lot of those runs with police officers, mental health is a huge conversation now, not just in Louisville, but in the country with the gun violence and everything. I don't know about the amount of dedicated funds to mental illness and services like that. Give us an overview on some of the things that we're going to see in this budget to address that.
Well, most of those programs, the mental health programs, they do exist. They exist within the corrections budget, and then they also exist within public health and wellness. And they're kind of allocated out to various different programs. So there's not like one line item that would say mental health issues, but it's embedded in a lot of the various programs that they run. And I don't have a specific amount in my head in terms of what that is, but those programs have existed in those agencies, and they continue to exist in this budget.
Let me ask you, with the budget chair and the vice chair, do you think enough is being spent on mental health services in Louisville?
Well, I, for one, would want to get department into the numbers before I
make a comment on that.
On
Would you think do you agree it's a priority, though?
It is a priority,
yes.
And we've got a couple departments still to come, so.
Right. Yeah, I think too, not just in those areas that Councilman Kramer mentioned in terms of police runs and so on, but it's also one of the other issues that we're spending a lot of money to address is the whole issue of affordable housing and homelessness. And you can't speak to that issue without addressing mental health. And so having the wraparound services that also accompany some of the solutions that the mayor's put forward for trying to address some of the homeless situations is the mental health part. That's why it's so expensive. When people look at some of the areas that Mayor Fisher and then as Mayor Greenberg expands that, the cost of it, and they'll break it down like, well, you're addressing this many people and it's costing this many millions of dollars. That doesn't make sense, but it does make sense if you see that you're not just having a place for them to be stored, but that you're having a place for them to also get wraparound services, which is ultimately the reason that they're in a situation.
The holistic healing of it to get them off the streets.
If we don't do that, you don't get them off. You get them off the streets temporarily if you don't address it.
But you see the interconnectedness,
but it's expensive.
Right?
It's expensive.
You see the interconnectedness of what you all were saying. I mean, we went from violence to prevention to mental illness to homelessness. It all ties together. I was looking at some of what the budget said, $15 million for Louisville Affordable Housing Trust Fund. There are all sorts of different things like that in this budget. So homelessness also appears to be a very big priority.
It does, and I think we have around $2 million that exist in the Resilience and Community Services Department. Again, they have that funding, and it's built into the various programs that they run. But they have had a large focus on homelessness, I think, now for several years.
Because we've seen this isn't just a Louisville problem. It's so many cities across the country, right? I mean, Have you all looked at what other cities are doing to say, let's kind of mirror some of that? Or
yes, I think council members have, and certainly the mayor has as well, to look at what are the things, and some of the things that we've done. So last year with
Goodwill,
Goodwill.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, thank
the
you.
Opportunity
yes,
Campus.
Yes,
Because you all have money for that in there too.
Right.
Yeah.
So and the vans that go, that kind of travel around the city and bring services to folks. Those things we did those as pilot projects and realized that the numbers are pretty good, and so it does invite us to have more of an investment if it's going to if it's working.
Right.
Those things seem to be working.
Let's shift gears a little. ARP funding. How will that affect this year's budget?
Well, this year's budget, continues to leverage that federal funding. There's about there is $388 million. The funds have all been appropriated and identified with projects, and so those are underway. They're currently, there wasn't any sort of general funds that we needed to allocate to those projects in this year, so you wouldn't see that in this budget. But other than just continuing to leverage those opportunities and use that funding for the designated projects that have been identified.
And I guess at some point then you figure out, though, how do you fund those when that money is gone?
That's a key part of the discussion. Yes, indeed. It's a key part of the discussion.
I'm sure an ongoing discussion,
yes.
Right? One thing I did want to bring up with you all that I saw a lot of money allocated to was the revitalization of downtown Louisville. Talk to me about that, Councilman Kramer. I mean, it looks like there's all sorts of money in that with, again, money into the ambassador program, lighting to increase that, to get that feeling of safety, grocery store subsidies. I mean, it's a long list for downtown.
Yes, and you hit the nail on the head with that whole safety thing. We got a double whammy in Louisville. You had the pandemic, which kept everybody home. A lot of office buildings down here where people weren't here. And then we had some unrest, and so folks felt less comfortable being down here. Now that I don't know if I can safely say we're past the pandemic, but now that the worst of the pandemic is over, a lot of companies realize that they can get a lot of work done without their full offices. Some are coming back part-time, some not so much. And so we still have a lot of office space down here that's not being filled right now. And conventions are ramping back up, and we're getting our share. We're doing fine, except that it's like a three-legged stool. You can't, if we don't have enough of local folks down here, we can't support the restaurants. If we can't support the restaurants, we can't keep the conventioneers coming. And if we don't keep the conventioneers coming, we can't keep the restaurants full. So we have to find a way to get folks to acknowledge that actually downtown is a cool place to be, and it's just as cool to be down here today as it was 4 years ago before the pandemic. A lot of people in Louisville just aren't feeling that yet. And so I think the challenge for us is to find a way to help encourage that. And I think the lighting does it. I think The ambassador program makes sense. I think there's some economic development that's going to have to take place because there's some businesses that suffered through the pandemic that would love to revitalize, but it was challenging. And I think in many ways we helped them along, but I don't think we're quite finished. So,
anybody else want to weigh in on that part of it?
Well, as they say, you can't have suburban without urban. So, it really is important. It's a critical piece. And so a lot of, that's the area that as council members we have to, we have 26 different council districts, and you are trying to look at things that are important in your district, but ultimately the health of the city is extremely important. So we need to make sure that we have not only that it is safe, but that it also looks safe. And so, just if the numbers change, that's one thing. But if it doesn't appear to be different, if it doesn't, again, to the lighting and to, the streets clean and paved and, all those things are a really important part of the perception that it is safe along with it being safe. So
inviting.
They go together. They go together.
I'm assuming that's a priority of the mayor's.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add in, the grocery stores. You'd asked me earlier if there was something that kind of stood out that the mayor seemed focused on. And I can say that the conversation about the grocery stores, he was very, excited about the idea of having, real grocery stores, is how he referred to them, real grocery stores in the downtown area for the folks that live here, again, kind of contributing to that healthier community, the ability to have access to fresh food, produce, meat, and what have you. And so that was definitely one of the topics that I could see was important to him, and something that he wanted to have in there, have in the budget.
And to Councilman Kramer's point, if this is the new reality and we are going to have fewer workers in a downtown area, then we're going to need to have more residents in a downtown area. And you don't get that if they can't.
Shop.
There's no grocery store.
Right.
Yeah,
They have to drive 15 miles. They're
That's
not
right.
going to want to live downtown.
Right.
No,
Right.
no.
All those services that folks need if they live down
It
here.
may be cool, as Councilman Kramer said, but it's not very cool when you need to go to a grocery store.
Was there anything in the budget that was surprising to you all at all? Anything unusual, surprises, or?
I can't really think of anything, and again, I would credit.
That's probably good, right?
It's very good. Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't mean that we won't find something in tomorrow's hearing,
Right.
but to date, I also think that is a credit to the way the administration pulled things together, and even in the midst of like we're in, and we've got to pull this together very, very quickly. Still spent the time to reach out to folks to see what priorities they're hearing in their own districts and so on. So I think it's a credit to the ongoing conversation that they're, at least at this point, unless they've got those surprises deeply buried.
Well,
there haven't been many.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
did you want to say something?
Sure. The surprise I would offer, and it kind of reiterates what I'd said once before. I don't know the numbers. I'll wait, right, to see exactly how it bears out. But I think for me, the surprise was, and I'm going to misquote him, so I apologize, Mayor Greenberg, but he said something to the effect of, we want to reopen the front door on Metro Hall so people can come back in. And he said, but before you can invite the public back in, you've got to make sure that your space is appropriately taken care of. Like you can't have drywall hanging off the wall, right? You can't have paint chipping away. We've got to take care of those kinds of things, which again is so refreshing to me. I pointed out in previous administration, things as simple as just cut the grass in the parks, and I was accused of being more concerned about aesthetics than I was people. And I'm like, it's not the grass, it's important, but that's not the important thing is if you can't even get the grass cut, right? If you can't do the simple things correctly, what are our chances that we're going to do the hard things well? And it feels like Mayor Greenberg gets that if we don't do the simple things well, people aren't going to have confidence we can do the hard things. And so, again, it's not really a budget number I can point to. It's not, but just that attitude alone to me was surprising. And I say it with a smile on my face right now. It just makes me happy to know that the mayor understands we should do the simple things well so that we can prove to people when it comes to the hard things, we can do that too.
Well, let's get to the people and opening that front door, because now is the time for hearings and input and letting people know how they can participate. So we're about halfway through. And there's a schedule when you can come and look at louisvilleky.gov, the website, to see when the hearings are. Let's talk about those budget hearings and why you have them, because it's pretty much laid out. So what's the purpose of the hearings, and what are you all hoping to accomplish in them?
So, when you bring the agencies, and we've done it a little bit different this year, but when you bring the agencies over, what we tried to do is focus on those agencies that we hear the most concerns from our constituents about, whether it's something that, they're concerned that we're spending too much money in this area, or something, or not enough money in this area, or they're just concerned about, I'm not sure where that money is going in this area. Those are the ones that we bring over and have the hearings. And our thought is, we want to be able to ask those questions that we hear either in the surveying that we do in a general way from everyone in the community. We have a system set up for you to be able to ask questions and send things in to us and thoughts, and as well as many of us have individual meetings that we'll have between now and the end of the budget season to talk about concerns that people have. And then you're able to bring those questions back if people have specific questions. So it just gives us an opportunity to ask the questions. Ask, again, if the dollars match the reality. Ask those questions like we just did, a few minutes ago. Or if you're going to put $8 million for the DOJ, how did we arrive at that? Because I really don't know how we came to
that exact.
Yeah. So, how did we? Does that make sense to us? Or if a council, maybe we get in there and we're like, that's, when you look at other DOJ reports, that doesn't seem to be, a realistic number one way or the other.
Let's talk about, I guess, the big community hearing that people can go to. The budget hearing is on May the 30th at 6 p.m. That's the big one that you would invite the public to. Tell me how that works.
Yes, so that is the one. So you sign up the day of to be able to speak to the community, and to the budget. Well, generally it's the whole. It's pretty close to the whole council. Usually, it certainly is the budget committee, but usually most council members will attend those if they can. And it gives you an opportunity to have your similar to what we do with the budget, with the addresses at council meetings. It gives you 3 minutes for you to address the council. And then we have your contact information as well. So we can ask, if someone as a council member is, you're listening to a concern that they have, and you want to, and particularly if they're in your district, you might follow up with them and see if, if you need further information about what their issue is, because 3 minutes is pretty quick, but it gives us an idea of what their issue is and what direction they want us to see us move.
So there are two ways that the public can comment, through an online form, or they can sign up for that budget hearing. Is that how that works? I don't know who wants to
Correct.
jump in on that one.
Or they can do both.
Or you can do both.
And they can, you can email or call your council person at any time, and you can watch them. You can come down to the meetings, or you can watch them online, and you can contact your council person about any issues that you see or concerns that you have or suggestions that you have. And then, like I said, probably all the council members throughout the budget time will have a meeting or a coffee or something like that where they'll be in the district to answer questions and take suggestions for any number of things, including the budget.
How much do you all hear from constituents? How much of the public? Do you hear a lot? Is it too little? What are your thoughts on that?
There's usually overwhelming attendance at that May 30th meeting, so that will make for a relatively long day. It's a lot there, but spread throughout. The emails, the phone calls, folks are reaching out to the office quite a bit. My request of folks would be if you see me in the grocery store and you want to put a bug in my ear about some particular thing or other, I'm always happy to talk to folks. I'm somewhat of an extrovert, so I enjoy the conversation. The problem is that when I leave the grocery store, I'm going to have spoken to 6 people, and I'm not going to remember exactly which person wanted which thing. So my advice would be, leave a paper trail. Emails are usually a good way to go about that, and we can keep track of it that way. Again, if you come and speak at May 30th, it's on. First of all, we're all there, and it's the meeting is recorded. So even the council members who aren't able to be there in person very often are either following along or we'll go back and watch them later.
Yeah.
And Angie, talk to me a little bit about the mayor's perspective on public input, because obviously it seems to be very important. I mean, he's the one who ran through neighborhoods, and listening is part of the game for him. So tell me about that.
Absolutely. I mean, the mayor puts, I think, the highest priority on wanting input from the citizens here in Louisville, and I think he's, like you said, he's demonstrated that through his campaign all the way up. I think he's made himself very available and accessible to the extent that he can. I think he's tried to reflect things that he knows are important, in this budget, and so I think continued input is definitely welcome and encouraged.
When you all get this input, what happens next after that?
Generally, we have a room set aside, and we have a board, and so council members will bring, when they have concerns, they'll bring those concerns. If we need more, they hear at a hearing that we need more, workers at the zoo. So they'll say, hey, we need to double our workers at the zoo because this is really an important piece. Okay, that's great. Put it up there. And then next to it, then also tell us then where would we get those funds? Because you can fill up this side really easily. We need more of, but we also need to look at, okay, so if that's the case, what are the things that we're willing to sacrifice in order to make that happen? Because the budget has to balance. So we go through that process, and it's, of course, it's easier to justify making a change in the mayor's budget or adding something to the budget or deleting something from the budget if there's more folks that see that as the way to move forward. And then it gives you an opportunity to talk to your other colleagues about, here's the reason why I think we need to do this, and here are the reasons for it. I'd love to see your support. Ultimately, ultimately any decision that we ever make needs the support of lots of folks. On the budget chair, I'm grateful to have the position this time, but it doesn't give me an opportunity to go through and just select the things that I think are important and we move forward. So, it's a collaborative effort. And sometimes it's not always a clean effort. When people talk about sausage making, that's kind of the thing. That's what you're talking about.
It's a lot of prioritization, and you have to give and take and all of the above.
Yes.
Do you all, starting to wrap up, do you all feel confident that this budget is going to stay pretty much intact? I mean, are you feeling that good about it? Your thoughts from each of you, and as we start to wrap up.
Sure, about halfway intact, I think, right, Angie?
You tell me.
Talk about surprises, right? Yeah, I think, for both of us, I don't want to put words in Councilman Kramer's mouth, although I often do. I think the excitement that you hear us say in terms of council members from both Democrats and Republicans being excited about and being bought into the mayor's overall vision. So, when you start there, then there is fewer things that you have to adjust. When you see the mayor prioritize one of the things that's been a priority, and so he didn't have to do a whole lot of research on this one, but it's always been a priority on the council to have a really significant amount of money to paving. That's one of the things that we hear constantly is, not just potholes, but, this street.
Infrastructure.
The street is just one big pothole, so it's time to do the paving thing. And we had kicked that can down a number of years ago. I won't blame any particular administration. We've done it for a long time. But we had a plan to kind of come up with enough money to dig our way out of that over the years. So to see the mayor put in a really significant amount of money, then we probably don't have to change that a whole lot because he saw that priority that we see as a priority.
Seems like they're pretty good aligning priorities that I'm hearing from you all. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and it very much feels like that. I'd go back to the comment Councilman Blackwell made about the wall with the board. Typically what we'll do is we'll go in and say, what do we feel like, what on there do we think we can remove the funds from and survive without? And then once you've done that, then you know how much money you've got left to add things in. If you start doing, I'm willing to take this off to pay for this, you got 26 different council members who have 26 different ideas about what's more important. So it's again, to the comment about sausage making, it is been involved in it for a while. It's an interesting process, and But to your point, will the budget remain intact? I think it depends on how you define intact, right? If you look back historically, we've not made radical changes to most budgets. I think there have been a couple where we've made some pretty significant changes. But to Councilman Blackwell's point, if the mayor's are not if I should say given that the mayor's already said that it's a priority for him to acknowledge that we have some problems with deferred maintenance, that we have some huge problems, again to your point, with 300 short in the police department. He's acknowledged that these are issues. So you might see us, and this is a might, right? We'll get deeper into the numbers, but you might see us move money from one pool into one of the ones that's a priority. I can't imagine he's going to be terribly upset if we're simply moving, if we found a way that, we can move money from this place to that place. It won't be, I don't anticipate, and again, we'll get deeper in, but I don't anticipate any radical changes to what's going on.
Right. I mean, I think this budget was, compiled from a place of collaboration, and I think that if there are any changes that come about through the budget hearing process, that it would be, accepted in that same way, from a place of collaboration. So I don't believe that, we're expecting, again, any sort of radical changes or,
And just, in the same spirit of the collaboration that got us to the mayor's address, and, you mentioned earlier anything that was a huge surprise, and that's, I think the administration will also find that they won't see any huge surprises when it comes back the other way. Changes that we've made, we'll have had those conversations along the way. There won't be something on the night of the budget vote. Well, I shouldn't say that. I hope that there will be nothing on the
Nothing's
night.
100%.
It is never.
And the
never,
night of that
never
vote?
say never. But but I'm hoping that by that time, we'll have that conversation. We'll have those collaborations, and it gives the mayor an opportunity to say, I understand I understand why you're doing what you're doing here. I don't think that works, though. I think, for whatever reason, if there's a reason why this needs to really stay here because we've got matching funds, whatever it is, it gives us a chance to talk that through.
The night of the vote again for the budget?
That is...
Did I hear June 22nd?
June
22nd. Yeah.
June 22nd. So
yeah.
we're
Thursday
gonna,
the 22nd.
We are going to reconvene this brain trust after the vote for another podcast that we will have on June 27th. And thank you all for your input and helping the public get a better understanding of what money is going toward, and certainly addressing many of the concerns that residents have. And again, public safety and housing are the two big priorities in this budget. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for tuning in today for an in-depth conversation on the proposed budget. We'll be back on Tuesday, June 13th. Until next time.